Hello everyone and welcome back to True Crime Mysteries. Today we have our December Crime of the Month. In our Crimes of the Month series, we cover updates from previous cases, notable crimes covered in the news, and crime-related things that happened that month. As always, your friendly reminder to please give this video a like if you like the content, and subscribe for more if you haven't already because I make more content like this. But with that being said, let's get into it. Way back in April of 2019, one of our first cold cases solved by DNA videos covered the 1987 murder of Tanya von Cuylenburg and Jay Cook, a young couple from Victoria, BC, Canada, who had been murdered while visiting Seattle. It had been a cold case for decades and had been the first case to get a conviction using the revolutionary technique of reverse engineering family trees using distant relatives' DNA submissions. The technique had led to William E Talbot, a Seattle resident who had been 24 at the time of the murders. Upon his arrest, his DNA again was tested, and it was a match to the sample collected off of Tanya's body. William had never been a suspect in the murders. Though he had a criminal history, an indecent exposure charge, and an aggravated assault charge from 1985. In 2019, he pleaded not guilty to both charges, but was found guilty and sentenced to 2 life sentences. And again in 2019, his lawyer said they had plans to appeal the conviction, which they did. His appeal cited that his rights to an impartial jury was violated because a biased juror deliberated the case. A woman only identified as juror number 40 had been questioned by both state and defense but had made several comments in her voir dire that showed bias. According to the transcripts, the juror had told the court that her mother had been a survivor of domestic abuse, and when asked if it would affect her ability to be fair and impartial, she said, "To be honest, I feel like I wouldn't know until the time came. But I also have a daughter, and I think that might also play a part in how I might feel. If there was some action taken towards a young woman, I might take that personally and not be able to be impartial." She was asked again if she could set her personal experiences aside, and she replied, "I could try. I can't guarantee anything, right? It's something I usually express with my husband, that there are always multiple sides to a story, and I'm a facts-based person, so I could tell you that I will give it my very best should I end up being on the jury to do that." Despite her statements, the judge, now retired Judge Linda Crace, decided to keep her on as a juror, and she made it to the final jury panel. When the case had rested for deliberation, it had taken the jury 3 days to reach a guilty verdict. On December 6, 2021, the appeals court agreed that Talbot may not have been provided with a fair and impartial jury and agreed to overturn his conviction. The courts will meet again on January 5th to decide if there will be a new trial for Talbot or if the case will be dismissed entirely. Talbot will remain in prison until there is a decision. The lead detective on the case gave a statement to the media saying, "We know he's guilty from the evidence. If we have to present it again, we'll get him convicted again." Way back in one of the first Crimes of the Month videos we ever did, we covered Jussie Smollett's arrest for staging an alleged hate crime against himself. Back in January 2019, the Empire actor said that he was accosted in Chicago by 2 masked men.
What happened that night, Jussie?
And I see the attacker masked, and he said, "This MAGA country," punches me right in the face. So I punched his ass back. And then we started tussling. You know, it was very icy, and we ended up tussling by the stairs. Fighting. There was a second person involved who was kicking me in my back. And then it just stopped. And they ran off. And I saw where they ran. And the phone was in my pocket, but it had fallen out. And it was sitting there. And my manager was still on the phone. So I picked up the phone and I said, "Brandon." And he's like, "What's going on?" And I said, "I was just jumped." And then I look down and I see that there's a rope around my neck, which I hadn't.
You hadn't noticed it before?
No,
You didn't
because
see?
It was so fast. You know what I'm saying? It was so fast.
How long did this all
It felt like minutes, but it probably was like 30 seconds, honestly. I can't tell you honestly. I noticed the rope around my neck and I started screaming.
The attack had initially garnered national attention, but an investigation concluded that Smollett had staged the whole thing in order to bolster his career. The attackers, two brothers, came forward saying that they were paid $3,500 from Smollett to stage the attack. The two brothers testified at the trial. Smollett has maintained his innocence throughout this entire investigation, but he was fired from Empire nonetheless. The trial concluded December 7th with a guilty verdict. The jury deliberated for 9 hours and found Smollett guilty of 5 of the 6 felony disorderly misconduct charges. The sentence hearing is scheduled for January 27, 2022. Though he could face prison time, it is likely he will only receive a probation, a fine, and a community service. There is a quick little update on the Alex Murdaugh situation. We covered the once prominent South Carolina's lawyer's situation back in August, and then did a deep dive on the numerous criminal allegations, and this month he is back in court. On December 10th, Murdaugh was indicted on 21 additional charges related to the settlement money he stole from clients. He now faces nearly 51 counts of breach of trust with fraudulent intent, money laundering, and forgery. There has also been a final tally of money stolen, which prosecutors have said have totaled $6.2 million. They have also discovered fraudulent schemes going back as far as 2016. Murdaugh remains in custody without bond for his own personal safety. No word yet on any updates in the murder investigation into Paul and Maggie Murdaugh's deaths. "2021 has been a year filled with unprecedented extreme weather-related natural disasters. Mid-December, vicious tornadoes ripped through the southern United States, claiming more than 80 lives. It was the largest and deadliest on record for December since records began, and it had been caused by an unseasonably moist and unstable environment. Now, you may be wondering why natural disaster is being included in a Crimes of the Month video. Well, let me explain. At least 6 people have been confirmed deceased at an Amazon warehouse in Edwardsville, Kentucky. The billion-dollar company is being scrutinized for its handling of the situation. An emergency weather alert had gone out at around 8 p.m., and drivers were recalled back to the warehouse. The over 50 employees were not allowed to leave the facility to shelter at home. Instead, they were forced to shelter in the facility. This warehouse had a storm shelter, but not all the employees could access it. Many were instructed by management to shelter in bathrooms. At this time, it is unclear why everyone wasn't in these storm shelters. Survivors recounted the chaos leading up to the tornado. Many had stated that in their entire time employed at Amazon, they had never had a fire drill or tornado drill, and it was unclear what and where they should go in these kinds of situations.
Honestly thought for a couple of moments that it was over for me.
Craig Yost said the only thing that kept him calm while trapped underneath a 40-foot-tall concrete wall was the thought of seeing his wife and family again.
Being able to even just talk to, but let alone hug and kiss the people that I love was amazing.
Yost started working as a DPS delivery driver at the Edwardsville Amazon warehouse in October.
We're told we're under the care of Amazon when we're there. When we're in those vans, it's their area. They tell us where to drive, when, how fast. So we put our faith in them.
He was inside the building finishing up his shift when an EF3 tornado hit the facility Friday night around 8:30.
In the moment, those people were very clear about what was to be done, and that was to go to the area where we went.
He took shelter in the bathroom on the south end of the building with about 10 other employees.
And from what I've been told, the first place that tornado touched was the wall that we were standing next to.
That wall collapsed, crushing his lower body. He lay trapped for a few hours until first responders found him just after midnight.
Until they pulled me out, I was very, very aware of what was happening. I knew I had to be. If I didn't, I was going to die.
He was airlifted to St. Louis University Hospital, where he's recovering from a fractured pelvic, thigh, and tailbone. Grateful to be alive, but heartbroken for the 6 people who lost their lives.
I was as close to them as we are to one another in here now at that moment. A couple of them I worked very closely with. A couple of them I didn't know well, but if they were in that building and working there, they were good people.
Back with his family by his side, he sends his condolences to the victims' families who weren't so lucky.
I just can't imagine what they're going through. I can't.
Amazon declined to answer questions about its disaster plan and if employees were required to perform drills. John Jasper, an associate professor of economics at Carnegie Mellon University, responded to the disaster by saying, "The cost of the time to do the drills is also the time that they are not moving the packages. They have to think about these trade-offs, but I don't think any company wants to harm its employees." He emphasized the importance of companies ensuring that their facilities are not only safe by governmental standards, but also ensuring that employees are properly trained for emergencies to mitigate these kinds of disasters. There are people even calling to question why the warehouse had even been operating, knowing full well that there were extreme weather notices ahead of the tornado's touchdown. This never could have happened if they cared about the lives over productivity. The sister of one of the victims commented on social media, "I want them to answer for this. I want this to be a starting point of places taking the lives of their employees seriously and treating them as more than a number."
At least I did get to say I love you.
When Carla Cope saw that a storm was taking aim at the Amazon warehouse where her son Clay was working, she picked up the phone to warn him.
We told him that it looked like the storm was heading that way and that he needed to get to shelter. So we said, "I love you," and we hung up.
Clay told his mom he would do so, but only after he warned his coworkers.
He was trained in the Navy. That's what they do. And in his job, he would have put himself out there no matter what.
Once the storm passed, Cope immediately knew something wasn't right when Clay didn't answer her calls.
We were lucky enough to get there before they blocked the way where no one could get up there. So we parked and we walked as close as we could to the building, and we could see all the damage on the building, and it was on the south end where he would have been.
Amazon pledged to assist workers and families affected by the tragedy, which included a $1 million donation to the Edwardsville Community Foundation. However, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos posted on social media immediately after the tragedy about his space rocket. After much criticism, those posts were later replaced with a statement about the tragic loss at one of his facilities. Calls from massive corporations like Amazon to prioritize the health and safety of employees ahead of profits. Amazon profits have soared well over $100 billion since 2020. This is a story in my home province, and is a story that is both incredibly disappointing and enraging. For over a year, Bridget Clairot had been hired to work at the BC Women's Hospital in Vancouver. Clairot had allegedly used another nurse's name to get hired at the hospital, where she worked from June 2020 to June 2021.
It's been a year since Sasha Timku had surgery to have a polyp removed from her uterus.
I was in a very compromising position. Obviously, I was very vulnerable and nervous.
At BC Women's Hospital, she remembers a nurse who was loud and condescending and made her feel uncomfortable.
I just had to say, it's okay. They do this all the time. These are professionals.
Now it turns out that may not be so. Late last week, Timku got a disturbing letter from the hospital. The person who administered her pain medication wasn't a nurse. That person, allegedly Bridget Clairot, police say was posing as a nurse.
I felt pain, extreme pain from start to finish.
Timku says the surgeon had to stop the procedure.
It was also discovered that she worked in Victoria for 3 weeks in November of 2020 at the View Royal Surgical Centre. The 49-year-old woman was not registered to work as a nurse in BC, nor did she have any education needed to practice nursing, and what is more shocking is that this is not the first time this woman has been caught impersonating a nurse. In 2008, it was discovered that she had stolen another woman's identity to get a nurse's job in Calgary, Alberta. In 2007, she was also caught with a forged nurse's permit in Calgary. In 2009, she was in charge with impersonating another woman and providing police with a fake name. There were also court documents in 2006 in Ontario where she was caught using assumed identities from people she knew in order to obtain government licenses. While in Ontario, she had been working at small-town hospitals and clinics. She had been sentenced to 6 months in prison and fined $60,000. She is also wanted in the United States, in Florida and Colorado on several warrants for fraud and practicing medicine without a valid medical license, as well as theft, mischief, possessing blank prescription forms, forgery, and using another person's ID. Bridget Clairot has also used various aliases throughout the years, which include Melanie Smith, Melanie Thompson, and Melanie Clairot. A class action lawsuit has been filed with the BC Supreme Courts. It alleges that anyone who was a patient at the BC Women's Hospital from June 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2021 may have suffered battery when administered treatments from Clairot. At this time, it is unclear how many patients she may have treated or whether any adverse outcomes have resulted from her interactions with patients. Patients are being mailed notices if they were treated or suspected of being treated by Clairot. Danette Thompson, interim vice president of the BC's Nurses Union, described the allegations as absolutely alarming. She said that she's never heard of something like this happening in the province. The fact that this can even happen raises questions around the controls from the health employers and what is in place, and is it enough, obviously not, to keep our patients and our staff safe. On November 6, 2021, a woman called to request a welfare check for her neighbor. She couldn't recall the last time she had seen him, and he was a bit older and thought it would be better if a sheriff came by. Deputies arrived at the 200 block of Jennifer Lane, Seneca, South Carolina, to find the resident deceased in the home. They determined that he had died sometime in July, and his body had been in the home for months before anyone noticed. Law enforcement was having a hard time identifying the man. He was known locally as James Fitzgerald, but officers couldn't find any identification that matched that.
He was a ministerial servant, so he had privileges of helping the elders maybe read during the meeting. I thought he was liked by everybody. He was very easygoing.
He was definitely respected in the church. I feel like everyone got along with him. He was definitely trusted, well-liked.
They took his fingerprints and input them into a national database and were shocked to discover what came up. The fingerprints identified him as Frederick Cecil McLean, a man who had been a wanted fugitive for nearly 2 decades. It was also determined that McLean died of natural causes at the age of 70. McLean had disappeared from San Diego, California in 2005. He was wanted on multiple counts of sexual assault on a minor and was deemed a high risk for sexually assaulting young girls. McLean had been a Jehovah's Witness and had used his position in the church, a position of trust and power, to get access to children. One of his victims had come forward and said that the abuse had begun when she was 5 and had continued into her teens. It had been a shock to discover his crimes had been going on for decades. In 2005, law enforcement had been honing in on an arrest. McLean knew multiple victims had begun coming forward, and he likely had a plan for his inevitable arrest. He began selling properties for cash as well as anything he had of value. Right before his arrest, he met with his estranged wife and children and told her that he couldn't go to prison and said goodbye before disappearing. He had been living in Seneca for at least 3 years. Law enforcement had also traced his whereabouts to Poughkeepsie, New York, and Anderson, South Carolina, where he had also used aliases. Law enforcement are continuing to determine if McLean had help in his 16 years on the run, and if there are any additional victims since 2005. U.S. Marshal Steve Stafford of the Southern District of California said, "We wish McLean's fate had been determined by a court of law 15 years ago. The investigators working on this case never gave up. We hope McLean's death brings some sense of closure for the victims and their families, especially knowing that he could never hurt another child." Anyone with any information about McLean is urged to contact the U.S. Marshals directly or to local law enforcement. A UK chef has been given 4 months in prison for failing to adhere to food regulations from an incident occurring in October 2018. 40-year-old John Crutcher was the head chef at the Crew Arms in the Northamptonshire village of Hinton-on-the-Hedges. He had been preparing a luncheon for over 35 villagers coming from church. 32 of those people ate the shepherd's pie there. For those unfamiliar, shepherd's pie is made from minced meat, usually beef or lamb, usually mixed with onions, carrots, and peas and gravy, and then mashed potatoes cover it, and that's baked. The following day, all those who had consumed the pie began experiencing extreme gastrointestinal distress. One patron, a 92-year-old woman, was admitted to hospital, and she died of a gastrointestinal hemorrhage from vomiting. An investigation began, and it was quickly linked to the pub. It was determined that Crutcher had prepared the meal himself, and he had undercooked the minced meat. He hadn't cooled the mix before putting it in the fridge and failed to take the temperature to ensure it had gotten down to a safe storing temp before leaving for the night. The next day, when he rewarmed the mix, he again failed to ensure it had gotten to a safe temperature before serving to the patrons. He said in his defense, "I hate to say it, I really hate to say it, but I think I was rushed. I was rushing. Remorse is an understatement. This is something I will never forget. Because of it, I am a better chef, and it is just a shame the cost of it had to be what it was." The pub is under new ownership now, and it had only received a 1-star health report in 2018 and only 3 stars in 2017, showing that while under Crutcher's management, he had a history of improper food handling tendencies. In addition to his prison sentence, he has also been fined £13,000, about 18,000 American, for his negligence. Hopefully, this will be a reminder for food handlers that food safety standards are put in place to prevent foodborne illnesses from happening, because those who are older or immune compromised, it can have deadly consequences. "72-year-old Robert Buell had been the owner of Smuggler's Inn for 20 years. The bed and breakfast borders Blaine, Washington, and Surrey, British Columbia. The property only has a field separating the two countries. Buell was accused of helping 7 migrants from Afghanistan and Syria cross into Canada from his property, which is located directly across from an unfenced area of the Canada-US border, separated only by Surrey's Zero Avenue. Canadian courts alleged that they had evidence that Buell would be contacted by phone or text by a person or family looking to cross the border, and he would pick them up in Blaine or Seattle between May 2018 and March 2019, and it was alleged he charged between $200 to $700 US for his services, according to court documents.
On the edge of Boulet's property, on this side of the rocks, this is the US. Where I'm standing over here, this is Canada. Crown alleges Boulet was giving migrants directions on how to travel east on Zero Avenue to get them to a nearby gas station on the Canadian side.
What was odd to the Canadian government was that documents surfaced from the U.S. Homeland Security. Buell said in sworn testimony that he was assisting Border Patrol since 2003 to provide information about his guests, which he claimed had resulted in numerous arrests. U.S. Border Patrol told media that Buell was not an informant for their agency, and ICE, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, said they could not comment on the matter. As a bail condition in 2019, Buell was forced to put signs up on his property warning people that crossing into Canada was illegal and was bound by a court order to report the identity of anyone seeking to cross illegally to Canadian authorities. Buell offered an apology for his behavior shortly before the sentence was imposed, saying, "For all my life, I've tried to do the right thing. For me, that is trying to lead by example. When I make a mistake, I try to take responsibility for it. In this case, I made a bad mistake. I'm sorry to the court, the citizens, and the government of Canada, and I'm truly sorry for my actions." On December 17th, Buell pleaded guilty, and the BC Supreme Court in Vancouver delivered their sentence, saying that time was served in this case and he would be allowed to be released on probation.
Len Saunders, a U.S. immigration lawyer who's been friends with Boulay for 20 years, says the Canadian government is using the senior as a scapegoat.
Who cares how he gets paid as an innkeeper? That's irrelevant. He has a service that he does at the border, and I don't think it's up to him to determine where his clients go after they spend the night at his inn.
If this truly were a high-volume operation, CBSA would have more evidence than 7 payments for 7 people.
This was a very odd case. Buell was released and allowed to return back to Washington, and has been made explicitly clear that if he is caught using his property to help anyone illegally cross into Canada, he will be required to serve the 15-month sentence. Well, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for everyone who commented on topics they wanted to be covered this month. I can't always see comments. If I don't respond to your comment, feel free to email, tweet, or DM me on Instagram. Anyways, as always, please give this video a thumbs up if you like the content, and subscribe for more if you haven't already. If you've done all that and want to support me and the channel, we have channel membership as well as Patreon to get early access, members only content, and more. We also have merch and other goodies in the description box, as well as links to all my socials. But until then, I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.